out there. He's got it for $25. We saw him in Lebanon for one of the meetings that we went to. He spoke there. We bought the book, read the book. It's very enlightening. You'll really see what's going on in care in a whole bunch of other places. So if you can, the books are out there. Dick will take your money, $25 for the book. And as far as what Chris is going to be talking about, he was undercover in care, as we said in the announcement, which meant that he was in there right in the middle of what was going on in the upper echelons. How he ever got into that, I'll never know, but he did. And so what I'm going to do is let him talk about his experiences as an undercover operative for the federal government.
All right. Well, I've got my energy drink here, so we're going to have fun tonight. Thank you all for coming out. How many people have ever seen me talk before? Okay, good. So this is new for most of you. I always like to tell groups that we're going to have as much fun as you can possibly have when you're talking about jihad and Marxism. So I have to in order to stay sane. But I just drove in from Roanoke, Virginia, so forgive me, I need a little caffeine. All right, you're familiar with, most people read about my experience going undercover with CARE. Are you familiar with that group, Most People CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations? Okay, let me give you a quick background. Anybody heard of the Holy Land Foundation trial? I've seen several heads nod, okay. The Holy Land Foundation trial was the largest terrorism financing trial ever successfully prosecuted in U.S. history. They were adjudicated, or they were indicted in 2001, the Holy Land Foundation, and in 2008 the case was adjudicated, and there were 108 guilty counts for the largest Islamic charity at the time it was indicted for funneling millions of dollars to designated terrorist group Hamas. Now, think about the timing of that. This is 2008. Some of the most prominent Islamic organizations in America, including CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, were listed as unindicted co-conspirators in that trial. Now, the idea behind these investigations, this was a 15-year FBI investigation, the idea was that in 2009 they were going to then start going off and indicting the unindicted co-conspirators, because there was a mountain of evidence to show that these Muslim Brotherhood organizations were also involved in funding Hamas. And why wouldn't they? Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay? Now what happened in end of 2008 and the beginning of 2009? Something fairly significant. Oh, yeah, President Obama. We had an election. They tell me elections matter. So, beginning of 2009, Attorney General Eric Holder shut down the entire investigation, and to this day, none of the unindicted co-conspirators have ever been indicted, even though there is a mountain of evidence. Now, that happened. How many people here are grateful that President Trump is the president right now? Feels so good to say that. It's been way, way too long. Look, I'm going to get down to the nitty-gritty here and be pretty raw tonight, because we only have so much time, and I would just, from a national security perspective, there's a reason that I'm out here and not in Washington, D.C. We're going to save our country right now the same way that President Trump won office, county by county, state by state. It is meetings like this, it is local activists at the local level getting organized. Just term, by the way, that conservatives, we can't really do that well, and we haven't for a long time. You know, for many of you that get involved, what is it? Getting conservatives organized is like herding cats, right? You ever heard that? Because the idea is, and has been, and the founders had the idea, that you elect decent human beings from your district to represent you in Washington, D.C., and that we go about our lives and raising our families and going to church and working for a living. But when we as citizens don't pay attention to what these guys are doing in Washington, D.C., well, that's when you get people like Obama and Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. Now, just for those of you that don't know, I spent 6 months undercover with this group, Hamas organization, in Washington, D.C. I wasn't in Israel, I was in Washington, D.C. with the Hamas organization. Think about that for a minute. Now, why would they want to be in Washington, D.C.? Exactly. One of the things I really want everyone to get tonight is that from a Muslim Brotherhood perspective, a jihad perspective, and when I say Muslim Brotherhood, I hope you know this group has the same ideology as Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. They are all saying the same thing over and over and over and over, that they're waging jihad to establish an Islamic State under Sharia. That's what they're telling us. People like Obama said this has nothing to do with Islam. And the last time I checked, Sharia had everything to do with Islam. I'm very comfortable talking about Islam, jihad, and Sharia because I spent 6 months undercover and I learned everything I know about it from imams and Islamic scholars in the United States. So I'm very comfortable giving these presentations and talking and answering any question anyone has on that subject. Some of my favorite topics or presentations are when I have Muslim Brotherhood groups in the room. I don't think there's anybody here, are there? I don't mind, I'm just saying. Okay. Where was I? Where do we want to go tonight? Marxism, jihad, Sharia. Oh, okay. So why am I even doing this? Well, my story is really my father's story when it comes to national security. He was an Air Force counterintelligence agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He spent 22 years in the Air Force, had a phenomenal career, and retired in the late 90s. Towards the end of his career, he primarily focused on counterintelligence. And for layman's terms, he was a spy catcher. He was catching spies that were stealing secrets from our U.S. military. He retired in the late 90s, and after 9/11, he came out of retirement, went to Northern Virginia, spent 9 months learning Arabic, became a U.S. State Department trained Arabic linguist, and after already retiring, went back to war in Iraq. And it's truly a miracle, I believe, that he wasn't on one of those videos with the black flag of jihad behind him, because all he ever did as an intelligence agent was go into an area and gather intelligence and talk to the locals, and everybody knew he was an American. He's from Franklin County, Virginia. It's the moonshine capital of the world, so it's not like he could hide it. But when he came back, he started to realize that some of the same people that he was fighting over there were here, except they wore suits. Let me give you an example of that. Or hijabs, by the way, and we'll get to Ilhan Omar in just a moment. And Linda Sarsour, our favorite. Anybody heard of Abdurrahman al-Amoudi? So for those of you that haven't heard, and even those of you that have heard, this is always a good reminder. Abdurrahman al-Amoudi was the most prominent Islamic advisor in the U.S. in the 1990s. He founded or led over 24 of the most prominent Islamic organizations in America. He was a U.S. State Department Goodwill Ambassador for the Middle East peace process, and he founded the Department of Defense Muslim Chaplain Certification Program. No other Islamic leader visited the White House in the 1990s more than Abdurrahman al-Amoudi. And then in 2003, he stopped at Heathrow Airport with a bag of $340,000 cash, which, by the way, he says that he found outside his hotel room. Anybody in law enforcement, you ever hear that before? You know, that's not mine. Well, come to find out, he's an Al-Qaeda financier, and he is doing 20 plus years in federal prison. But think about that for a moment. You don't have to raise your hands. We probably know the answer. How many of you here, at any time, whenever you want, could go visit the White House and get a meeting with the president? It's not really easy, is it? And yet, Abdurrahman al-Mahmoudi had access to the President of the United States throughout the 90s. And he was Al-Qaeda. Now, do you think he was the only one? And here's the point that I really want to make, that I started to make earlier, but I wanted to set the stage a little bit. When we think about jihad, jihad is legally defined as warfare against non-Muslims. Total warfare. It is not just kinetic warfare. It is not just shooting things and blowing things up. In fact, political influence operations, influencing Western countries, particularly the United States, and our media is more effective oftentimes than shooting things and blowing things up. Now, Al-Qaeda, which by the way is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, many of its leaders came from the Muslim Brotherhood, has a 200-plus page document. It's not an easy read, but it's called Management of Savagery. And they essentially talk about how to maximize the impact of a terror attack, because the goal of a terror attack is not the actual terror, it's the aftermath. It's the billions and billions of dollars that we spent revamping our airports so that every one of us has to go through extra layers of security, so that we have extra layers of bureaucracy, that we created an entire new agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and spent billions of dollars on that. It is the fear that is created. It is local law enforcement, after a terror attack, not knowing what to do, so they invite groups like CARE to come in and train their law enforcement on how to be sensitive to the local Islamic community. Inviting Hamas into your law enforcement agency to train them. Hiring more groups recommended by your Islamic advisors like Abdurrahman al-Mahmoudi to become law enforcement officers so they can have access to counterterrorism investigations that are going on. You see how that might be a problem? So it's not just the physical warfare that these guys are after. Remember, the goal is to create an Islamic state under Sharia everywhere. They know they can't do that by physical warfare, but they can influence us. And I'm going to give some examples tonight, but I just want to be very clear about that. And just to think about the impact that this has, political influence operations. I'm going to give you a few examples of them doing this, and you would have probably never even thought of it. So, anybody keep up with many jihadi writings from the 80s and 90s? You guys don't have it in your bathroom like I do? So, one of the main goals of jihadi groups in the 80s and 90s was to depose the tyrants in the Middle East. Why? Well, let me ask you a question. If the goal of all these jihadi groups, whether it's the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, the Taliban, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, fill in the blank, all the jihadi groups, all of them saying that they want to establish an Islamic State under Sharia. If that's the goal, let me ask you a question. Was Saddam Hussein implementing Sharia in Iraq?
No.
No.
Was Mubarak in Egypt implementing Sharia fully? No. Was Gaddafi in Libya implementing Sharia? No. Was Assad in Syria implementing Sharia? No. In fact, they weren't really doing it in Turkey until Erdogan in that group started to take over in the late 90s and early 2000s. So, when we, the most powerful military in the world, overthrew the dictators in the Middle East, we achieved the strategic objectives of groups like Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. Clueless. Why? Because after 9/11, our commander-in-chief and the entire national security apparatus. And by the way, I'm talking about Bush, just so we're very clear. Okay. For those like me that are not historians here. We did not take the time to understand this enemy. U.S. warfighting doctrine states clearly that you begin to assess the enemy based on who they say they are and why they are fighting. And yet our Islamic advisors, think Abdurrahman al-Moody, advised us that Sharia wasn't a big problem. In fact, it was Islamophobic to equate these jihadi groups with Sharia, even though that's the blueprint for why they're fighting. It's how they fight, it's the blueprint for the way that they operate, it is their threat doctrine, and yet we ignored it because we abdicated our responsibility to understand this enemy and brought in Islamic advisors like Abdurrahman al-Moody. And what you get under two different styles, the Democrats under Clinton and Obama and Bush, is catastrophic failure on this issue. Catastrophic failure. When President Bush stood up in front of Americans and lectured us about the peaceful nature of Islam after we had 3,000 dead Americans, what was interesting to me looking back on it is not the words. When he said, those who kill in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. Well, first of all, if you understand Sharia, that's absolutely false. 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 The highest form of worship in Sharia is to die a martyr when you're waging jihad. So it's the exact opposite of what our president said to us after 9/11. And just to be very clear, I've never voted for a Democrat, okay? My rebellious stage in college was being a libertarian for a little while, right? So I'm as conservative gets. Now, I don't know what was in President Bush's heart, but I know that he failed us. And I'm harder on Republicans, by the way, than I am on Democrats, because I already know what the Democrats bring to the table, okay? I can just go to the DNC's platform and compare it to the Communist Party USA's platform, and I challenge you to find a difference. And I'm being serious about that. So I know what the Democrats are about. The DNC is the Marxist Party in America. And we can hammer that down if you think that's too heavy. I'm glad to do it. But Republicans get on the campaign trail, like Bush and Paul Ryan and Marco Rubio and John McCain and the establishment that fought President Trump tooth and nail and are still fighting him tooth and nail, the Mitt Romneys fighting him tooth and nail. They say one thing on the campaign trail and in the fundraising trail, and then they get over there and we get what we get today, which are these bloated budgets and compromises with the left over and over and over. And finally, thank goodness, thank God for President Trump, we actually have a fighting chance. And if it weren't for him, I don't know where this country would be, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, by the way. From my perspective, I'm going to be on the road between now and November of 2020, working with local conservative groups to help us get more organized, because the other side has been fighting against this country to tear this country down since at least the 1930s, which is why they were able to transform the Democrat Party into what it is today. Yeah, I'm not accused of bringing good news everywhere I go. Sorry about that. So, when we, the most powerful military in the world, deposed the dictators in the Middle East through one form or another, we implemented the jihadis strategy. Now again, I'm not saying, by the way, that we shouldn't have destroyed the Taliban in Afghanistan. Okay? I'm not saying that. What I am saying is our leaders didn't take the time to understand Sharia, so that's why you've got a 17-plus-year war over there with no clear idea of victory. Does anybody know what victory in Afghanistan looks like? Because I can promise you the generals and colonels that are over there right now and have been waging that war, maybe not right now, but have been waging that war, have absolutely no idea either. Which is why we've been over there for 17 years. There was a Pew poll done in 2013. 99% of Afghanis want to live under Sharia law. the Taliban wants to implement Sharia law. So let's just say, as I testified in front of the U.S. Senate a few years ago, that we kill every single member of the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, or let's just, in Afghanistan, use the Taliban as an example. Let's say we kill every single one of them tomorrow. Well, if the people want to live under Sharia, then I'm not a gambling man, but I'm pretty sure that another group will rise up and do what the people want, which is implement Sharia. What they're not going to do is have U.S. advisors come in and implement a Western Judeo-Christian style constitutional republic in Afghanistan. Now, President Trump, being the man that he is, that can look at this with some common sense and doesn't go with the smart set that has failed us in D.C., and says, you know what? I don't know what victory looks like, so I'm pulling us out of Afghanistan. And he's working to pull us out of Iraq and Syria, which, oh, by the way, our U.S. State Department helped the Iraqis write a constitution that implemented Sharia in Iraq. And President Trump is seeing this, and he's saying no. Now, isn't it interesting that all of a sudden MSNBC and CNN are all of a sudden pro-war because President Trump wants to pull us out of a war? My challenge, that's a six-pack of beer, by the way. Sam Adams. I'm just kidding. Kind of. My encouragement to everyone as I'm traveling around the country is believe what you're seeing. Believe what you're seeing when you have people that are openly socialist. In the 1930s, socialism was a dirty word. It was. And now we have people openly running as socialist candidates. Now, many of us on our side of the aisle, and particularly talk radio hosts, which, by the way, I love many of them, but they're seeing this Green New Deal and they're laughing at it. Now, I promise you, the left wouldn't be putting up this Green New Deal, which, if you read it, is pure Marxism through and through. They wouldn't be putting that on the table and having every single presidential candidate approve of it for the DNC if they didn't actually think that their base was on board. They're not interested in your vote. They actually think that they've got this in the bag, otherwise they wouldn't be coming out and being openly socialist. There was a time when they had to hide it. When you believe that you have won, you no longer need to hide it and you need to energize your base, which is exactly what we're seeing right now. My expertise from a national security perspective is jihad and Sharia. I can tell you anything that you want to know about Sharia as it pertains to us. But to boil it all down, all the jihadi groups have one thing in common. Sharia divides the entire world into two parts. The Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, all lands under Islamic rule, Sharia. And the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, all lands not under Islamic rule. This is the Dar al-Harb, the House of War. All lands not under Islamic rule are called the House of War per Sharia. So, what does the left have in common with that? Think Marxist ideology. Think Lenin, think Stalin, think Mao, and Castro in Cuba. What do they have in common with that? These are revolutionary ideologies everywhere that they go. Their entire purpose is to destroy, create civil discourse and chaos. Civil unrest discourse. Civil unrest and chaos everywhere that they go until they can have enough chaos to have a revolution. So when I say, believe what you're seeing, believe exactly what you are seeing. And the only reason that the other side, if they had their way, President Trump would not have won, and they would have been able to implement their goals without anybody knowing. Meaning, as they revealed it, these same people that are essentially effecting a coup against our president would have been the ones coming after us Because if they can do that to President Trump, what do you think they can do to us? I'm doing what I'm doing, which is essentially working with local citizen groups to get organized against the left. Because from my perspective, we either get these next 6 years right, or we lose the republic. There is nothing, and this is really, my concern is, as I'm traveling around the country, local groups get this. At the national level, the GNC, actually. The GOP is still playing politics as usual. And we cannot afford another Mitt Romney or another Paul Ryan. We cannot afford that. These two, what we are witnessing in history right now is the merging of two of the most dangerous ideologies known to mankind. Jihad and Sharia, a 1400-year conquering ideology, and Marxism, which started, well, we'll just go with the revolution in Russia as a starting point. And no, that's not the pure starting point.
1848 and about 12
Right.
years before that.
But yeah, but when they actually took power. So in 100 years, this is a movement that has conquered Russia and China. And I'm not a geographer or anything, but they're pretty big, right? Many parts of South America, many parts of Africa, and they've actually embedded and bored their way right into here in the United States. And these two movements have merged. Because while they have different end games, they have the same desire to create unrest and create revolution. So, if we as conservatives, if we do not get this right over the next 6 years, they will take power, and I guarantee it, they will not let go ever again. They will not let another 2016 go, which is why you're seeing what you're seeing with Facebook, Google, and Twitter slowly taking off big conservative voices. Because they understand the narrative matters. If people never hear the truth, how are they going to know what's going on, right? So if they, as they pull the Judge Jeanines off the air, and they don't replace it, which by the way, the same week, just think about this, the same week that they pull Judge Jeanine off for making a factual statement and having a legitimate question about Ilhan Omar, they bring Donna Brazile on. And did anyone hear that Paul Ryan is now coming to the board on Fox? So, what I'm saying is we can't rely as a movement, and this is a movement, all President Trump has done, and I'm not minimizing it all, meaning he went up against a 24/7 barrage against the mainstream media against him. His own party was attacking him. And of course, the DNC is doing what they're doing. And yet, he still won by the grace of God. He has given us, this is a reprieve. This is not victory. This is a reprieve. We either get organized, get active, and fight for our country like our country depends on it, because it does, or they will take this country from us. And we all know how it goes with the left. And Steve Bannon said something after President Trump won that I have always thought was spot on. You don't think that they're going to give you your country back without a fight, do you? This is an organization and a movement that has been working hard since the 1930s. And they have got what they have today, where conservatives have no voice on universities. The entire mainstream media is nothing but DNC propaganda. It is state-run television. All they need at this point is us out of the way. So again, more good news. Here's what I believe that we need to do because I don't just want to come into town and say, hey, the world's coming to an end, well, see you later. I think we've been focused on as a movement is education. And what I'm seeing is that we can't spend the next 6 years reading books. Now, that's not to say that we don't need to understand our enemies, so we do need to understand Marxism. We need to understand Sharia. We do, to some level. You don't have to be an Islamic scholar, and you don't have to be a Marxist scholar. You don't have to go to Berkeley, in other words. But we do need to understand. But more important than that, it's not good enough to fight against something. We need to know what we're fighting for. We are not a democracy. So the next time our conservative friends or talk radio show hosts say that, we need to remind them that that's not who we are. This is a constitutional republic, and the moral foundation of the Constitution is Judeo-Christian values, Holy Scripture, the Bible. When's the last time you heard a politician say that? When's the last time you heard a pastor say that? Yeah. About the country. Oh no, I can't talk politics. Really? If pastors were speaking boldly and truthfully about our responsibility as Christians in this country, 10% of them, if they just spoke truthfully about who we are as a nation, we would not be in the trouble we're in. What do you mean? Yeah, I've heard too many say I don't talk politics, and I'm like, well, politics is what we do in the public. So unless you're saying everybody needs to never go in public again, then maybe you need to talk politics. The number one thing that really, really should set the lever right now for where we're at is how this country feels about life. Because if you can't value the life growing inside of a mother's womb, and you have no problem killing that life, even after it's born, infanticide, how does that make us any different than what we saw in China under Mao, or Lenin, or Stalin? And here's my challenge when we think about those people. Imagine if Lenin or Stalin or Mao had access to every single email that anybody ever sent, every single phone call they ever made, every single text message they ever made. Once the left gets power again, they will have access to all of that. They already do, by the way. See Bob Mueller. The leaders of the Department of Justice attempted a coup against our president. That's exactly what that was and is. So, what I'm encouraging everyone to do is, you're already part of the solution. We are already part of the solution. But you don't have to raise your hand, but I want to ask yourself, how many of you are active in the local GOP? Because if you're in this room right now and you're not active in your local Republican Party, my question is, how are we going to transform this party into the party of the people, which is the party of President Trump, and wrestle it away from the people like Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney? How are we going to do that if we're not there? Now you can get really all idealistic on me and say, we're going to go third party. Yeah, okay, in 20 years, let's talk. Or we can actually change the party from the inside. And if we got organized, for those of you that do go, I travel all over the country, and I can tell you typically every month at the local GOP meetings, there's about 20 or 40 people in those meetings. You can literally take over and select leadership at those meetings if you just start bringing 20 people with you. Now there's more than 20 people in this room. People always ask me, what can we do to save the country? Well, I will tell you a few things that I think are good ideas, but don't think that somebody's going to come in from out of town and save your county and your state, because they're not. I can give you some ideas. But here's the thing, when I give people ideas, they're like, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. I'm going to give you ideas. I didn't say it was going to be easy, okay? But here are a few ideas. One, we wrestle the party from the establishment. If the establishment does what they want to do, which is wait out President Trump, we lose the country. That's what they think that they're going to do. They're just going to wait him out and pretend like they're fighting for him and get some good sound bites in every once in a while, but do nothing. Think the first 2 years that we had the House and the Senate and we didn't get border security, they can just string it along for another 2 more years, and then string it along for 4 more years, and then he's gone. And really, they don't even have to do it for the 4 years, because you know how it is to be a lame duck president. They are just doing what our enemies, by the way, overseas are doing. They think they can just wait President Trump out, because there won't be, they can go back to Jeb Bush all of a sudden comes in there and takes it. No, you low energy Jeb, yeah. Rock star. So, from my perspective, we've got to take and wrestle the GOP from the establishment. And all that really is getting, everywhere I go, at the grassroots level, at the local level, conservatives are the majority. Something tends to happen when leadership from the local level bubbles up to the state level and then the national level, and all of a sudden they become Paul Ryans, swamp creatures. If we get more involved at the local level with the GOP and demand that that doesn't happen, we have a chance. Again, I didn't say it would be easy. Our schools. Do we know what our children are being taught? Well, it's not good. It's typically pro-Marxist, global citizens instead of U.S. sovereignty. There's an organization called Truth in Textbooks. I'm not involved with the organization. I'm just telling you, if you feel called that you want to actually get involved in the school system and know what children are reading and what they're learning, then there's that organization. What they do is they have people all over the country that read the textbooks that children are learning in public schools, and when they find factual errors in those books, they have found a way to where they actually send them up to the publishers, raise enough of a ruckus, and they actually get them pulled and changed and corrected. And they've done that to dozens and dozens of books. That's a more long-term solution, but it's got to start somewhere. And that's the other thing I encourage everyone to do is prayerfully go into this. You're already here, you're already involved. I promise you, most of you are already doing something. Well, we're just all going to have to do a little bit more. So I encourage you to pray and say and ask yourself, what part of the local community do I need to get involved in more than I already am? The way to think of this from a mindset of political warfare, which is what this is. How many, well, you don't have to raise your hand, but for those of you that have ever deployed to an area where there was an insurgency, which is what the Marxist movement is in this country, and the Muslim Brotherhood, jihadi groups are in this country, the way that you counter an insurgency is at the local level. So if you're spending all of your time on Drudge Report, reading about what Senator so-and-so, not even from your state, is doing and what they're having for lunch in Washington, D.C., but you don't know what your city council's up to, then we need to flip that. All of our time and energy needs to be at the local level. If we're always paying attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C., all we're going to do is wring our hands. Other than getting a representative to go to Washington, D.C., a lawmaker, what else are you going to do? President Trump's got the swamp. He's fighting it day in and day out. Let me just ask you a question when we talk about elections and representatives. How many of you think that our big problem in this country is that we don't have enough laws? The problem is enforcement, right? So when we elect a representative to Congress, that's a lawmaker. There's only so much a lawmaker can do other than budgets, and that's pass more laws. Now, President Trump needs as much support as possible. We're about coming up to primary season. So here's my other encouragement. And look at the state level. Always look inward right now. If there is a Republican that is not supporting the president, they need to be gone. Primaried. I don't care what decorum is in the GOP. Get them out of there.
Senator Alexander.
Well, Chris, we can't do that because see, you know, he's an incumbent, and get him out of there.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too. President Trump defied the entire playbook, did he not?
Yeah. Right.
He was supposed to apologize when they attacked him. He was supposed to play their game, and if he would have played their game, he would have lost. Hands down. Being bold and speaking the truth is the #1 way to victory right now. So my challenge is, who in this room is a President Trump for our communities at the local level? We've got one in Washington, D.C. We need him on our school boards. We need them on PTAs, we need them in library boards and city councils. And I know, I can already see some people kind of shaking their head when I say city council. I've been to incredibly conservative areas around the country, and like if there's 10 progressives, aka socialists, in their town of 1,400, all of them are on city council, all right? I get that. But if we get organized, I think we all know, if you've ever been involved in local politics, it doesn't take that many people to affect local politics compared to the national races. And so my encouragement is, at every single level of local government and local activism, we need to be taking account of who's there and start saying, okay, this person is on our side, this person is far left, they'll never be on our side, and these are the seats that are up in play. And go through and get organized at every single level. And then there's the media. We need to stop worrying about what the media says about us. If we are worried that they're going to call us bad names, and that's why we're not going to get involved, because, oh my gosh, I have a business. We all have businesses. We all have livelihoods. Now, I hear this so much as I travel around the country and talk to leaders. Well, I'd love to get more involved, but, you know, I really have to stay out of it. Has a leftist ever worried about it? Ever? About a Facebook post if they'll lose business? No. I know this is harsh, but after doing what I've been doing for the last 10 years, I have no question about how the Nazis took over Germany. It was regular people saying, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to, I know it's bad, but I really don't want, you know, they're going to call me names, I might lose my job, and next thing you know, you've got Hitler and they're killing 6 million Jews. So the next time any of us say, I know I should probably say something, but I don't want to lose a little money at work, or maybe I'll get fired, I just want you to remember Nazi Germany, because they said the same thing. We will lose this country if we're afraid of being called a xenophobe, which we're not, by the way, and we're not racist, because if there is a racist in our midst, we kick their butt out, and rightfully so. We don't want them. But that's what they do to us. They tag us and they attack us with names because they know it works. It worked in Russia, it worked in China, and it worked in Germany, it worked in Cuba, and it's working here. And that message that they sent with Judge Amin was, we'll do it to you. We don't care how powerful you are and how big of a voice you have. Now here's where I'm going to end on this, and then where I want to do a Q&A. Ilhan Omar. This is how we are absolutely getting our... Never mind. This is how we're not doing well. She makes clear anti-Semitic statements that should be condemned wholeheartedly, no questions asked, period, point blank. And what happened? And again, remember Abdurrahman al-Moudi. Political influence. CARE, by the way, steps in on Capitol Hill, starts going to legislators and working with offices. The DNC was about to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism, as they should, and then all of a sudden they had to table it, and there was debate. And they lumped in, what? Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a made-up term to keep us from talking about the enemy threat doctrine. that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and the Muslim Brotherhood all say that they're fighting for. In other words, if you study the threat doctrine, Sharia, and you speak about Sharia, like Judge Janine did, then you're committing Islamophobia. Now think about that. If you talk about the threat doctrine of Al-Qaeda, you're committing Islamophobia. If you condemn Ilhan Omar going forward, after that resolution that a majority of Republicans signed on to because they are clueless when it comes to these issues, or gutless, I don't know which, now all of a sudden they took something where somebody makes an anti-Semitic statement and she gets a victory out of it. Because now going forward, the Congress just passed a resolution saying that they condemn Islamophobia because of Ilhan Omar's statements. She makes anti-Semitic statements, and Republican congressmen sign a bill condemning Islamophobia. Clueless. Because they don't want to be called names, so they just sign the bill. Now, not all of them. There were several that were bold and courageous. Representative Lee Zeldin did a phenomenal job and gave a great speech. Representative Louis Gohmert gave a great speech, but generally speaking, they all caved. If we do not hold our representatives accountable, and look, I don't know any other way to say it, the left is using Islamophobia as a way to hammer us. There is no reason in the world does anybody think that Christianity isn't attacked on a daily basis here in America. Is anybody ever worried about that? No. But our representatives are afraid of being called an Islamophobe, so they don't stand up to these bullies like Kerry. My challenge is to, once we do what President Trump did, and say, I don't care what you call me, because the left is going to attack us regardless of what we do. So we might as well get used to it. Just go out there, be bold, speak the truth, say who we are as a nation and why we're fighting, and go out up against the Marxist movement, and go out up against the Islamic, the jihadi movement. They call themselves the global Islamic movement. Or, if we want to be so nice and not offend anybody, then we lose the Republic. And I'm at a point in my life, and I got to see America that was beautiful, and that was free, and had liberty. But we all lived it too. We have an obligation to pass that on. And if we're too concerned about being called a bad name, then we don't deserve that liberty anyway. I don't believe that's the case, by the way. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think we could win. My encouragement is that let's not fool ourselves into thinking that right now it's politics as usual, because it is not. The other side is ready to destroy us. They will destroy people, destroy careers, destroy families. General Flynn was a patriot, and he got destroyed. The other side is willing to destroy us. And I hear our side getting up on the campaign trail saying, well, you know, this, my opponent is a good man or a good woman. It's just that, you know, we have some differences. No, he's a Marxist. And he wants to take everything from us, or she. And so, no, I don't send you guys to go to Washington to get along and reach across the aisle with a Marxist or a jihadi. I send you to Washington, D.C. to defeat them and save the Republic. Period. But, yeah, so I'd like to do a Q&A, and thank you.
Okay, any questions?
None? Okay, good. Yes, sir.
Do you think John Brennan was a Muslim?
Park here so that
Do you think John Brennan was a Muslim?
You know, I don't know.
Have you
I mean,
heard
it
that?
doesn't. Yeah, I get. So let me. I'll answer that the same way I would answer the question about President Obama. It doesn't matter. Their policies said everything, right? I mean, Brennan, at the height of the Cold War, voted for a communist candidate for president. I don't know how the man ever made it to the CIA anyway. See Marxist infiltration in the United States government.
Exactly.
The point that these people ever made it to the positions they did says everything. So I look at Brennan's policies were favorable to the Muslim Brotherhood and they were favorable to Marxism. What he was on the inside, I don't really care. But it's a good question.
Can you speak briefly on how you embedded yourself and what it was like?
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention that. So I ended up spending 6 months with CARE in Washington, D.C. The mosque, I did a fake conversion to Islam to infiltrate myself into this Hamas organization because they're all about Sharia, so I wanted them to, believe I was Sharia compliant Muslim. I did a fake conversion, by the way. I am a Christian, just to be clear. Grew my beard out. I went to a mosque in Northern Virginia to do the fake conversion that Anwar al-Awlaki was the imam of prior to me getting there. So Anwar al-Awlaki was the guy we all know. He was the moderate voice of Islam until one day he popped up in Yemen as an Al-Qaeda leader. It's crazy how they do that, huh? They all get their version of Islam wrong in the exact same way. And then ended up pulling about 12,000 pages of documents out of CARE showing that they were supporting terrorism, fraud, sedition against the U.S. government, working with legislators to affect foreign policy and domestic counterterrorism policies, working with the media. They have an incredible relationship with the media. And I can just tell you, CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood, I saw this from the inside, they get their activists who have jobs during the day, and then when they are done with the day, they spend their entire evenings working to destroy this country. Day in and day out. And in the left, by the way, when I see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I see the same intensity as someone like Nihad Awad, who is the leader of Hamas here in the United States. The exact same intensity. She is a true believer, and she is being taken seriously because she is parroting Marxist doctrine that she's been taught from the time she was little in Brooklyn. And so when I see these two movements merging, I literally saw these guys doing it 10 years ago on the inside. And the progress that they have made is phenomenal. And just looking at it from a threat perspective, I have to just take a step back and admire that they actually had plans, and they worked hard, and they implemented those plans. And trying to think. What's that? Oh. So
tell them a little bit about the positions you had in there, because if you read the book, you really need to read the book to see all of that went on, how he got in there, and how you were able to get up into the hierarchy of the organization.
Yeah, so this is it's kind of a funny story considering, but so I was working at an office, a satellite office in Herndon, Virginia, which is outside of DC, and I came in as an intern, and meaning there was no fiduciary responsibility. So from a legal perspective, that was the best way to approach that. But I worked in this office undercover, and it was a small office. But what happened early on was that there were Muslims that were calling the office CARE because they purport themselves to be a civil rights organization, and they were calling the office complaining about an attorney that had been taking money from them. And so this civil rights organization, quote unquote, had one civil rights attorney at their satellite office, and because I was a good intern and I stayed late at night when everybody else was gone, and they gave me access to passwords and office tours and all of that, we determined that their one resident attorney, they had never taken 5 minutes to vet, and he actually wasn't an attorney at all. He had never passed a state bar exam. He wasn't licensed to practice law anywhere in the country. In fact, he had a rap sheet out of Philadelphia. CARE, now think about that. If you had a health clinic and they only have one doctor, maybe you would think they don't actually care about health, that they never check to see if the doctor was an actual doctor. Well, this is not a civil rights organization. This is a political influence operation. They just had to have some guy that was an attorney there. Well, CARE ended up closing the office down, and they didn't contact the state bar, they didn't contact state police or local police, they did the opposite. Closed their bank accounts, closed their email accounts down, and they started shredding documents. And who does the boring work like shredding documents? It's the intern. So my version of shredding the documents was wait until everybody left and then put them in the trunk of my car. But the interesting thing about that is that the executive director of this office used to work in their headquarters in Washington, D.C., and he really liked me. Honestly, a lot of it was because I made good coffee, which all I did was put it in the machine. So he gave me a verbal recommendation to go into Washington, D.C., and they never vetted me because they trusted him. He actually wrote the security manual and protocol for Washington, D.C., so they're figuring, well, if he gives them a verbal recommendation, and I literally walked right into their headquarters on a recommendation. They never checked my ID, anything. And I spent the entire summer, and this is the part that is truly amazing. That summer, CARE was cleaning out their archives in the basement of their headquarters. And they had all of these interns that had showed up. Now, interns go to Washington, D.C. to do what? Get a career, network, make contacts in D.C. The last thing they want to do is be stuck in the basement shredding documents. They do a lot of shredding, by the way. So the office manager, I would come into the office in D.C. and they would say, hey, well, do one of you guys mind shredding documents today? And I would be like, oh, I'll do it, I guess. And I would sit down there throughout the week and I'd look at it. If it was evidence, I'd put it aside. If it was innocuous, I would shred it. And my other job for CARE was going to the mosque every Friday, passing out pamphlets on behalf of CARE. So I would go in, I would pray with everybody, and then I'd go pass out the pamphlets. So it wasn't a big deal on Friday for me to leave the building with a box of pamphlets. Except one of my boxes would be pamphlets, and then I'd go back in, and then I'd get another box, and it was evidence. And I would walk out, and they would see me, and they'd go, oh, look at David, he's such a good intern, look at him, mashallah. And I'd be like, oh, and that's how, over the course of 6 months, I got 12,000 pages of documents out there. It was just week in and week out. But I'll tell you this quick story. Do you mind? It's like 2 minutes or less. Okay. So at the end of the summer, I had told them that I was a college student, which, by the way, was the most successful part of the operation. I was like 28, and I told them I was a college student. So I was proud of that. But I told them that I was going back to school, and I had gone back, and they had this annual fundraiser where that's where they raise a lot of their money. And my father, this happened in the fall, my father had contacted the victims of the fraud scheme in Northern Virginia in the spring and asked them if they wanted to sue CARE. So while I was working in headquarters after they closed that office down, he was working with the victims that, of this fraud scheme that wanted to sue CARE. And my dad, he's funny, he has a good sense of humor, he thought what better place to serve them papers than at their annual fundraiser. So it was a huge room in Washington, D.C., a ballroom. It was really nice. All these dignitaries were there, and including Keith Ellison, who was on top of that. My dad has this thing, it's really funny, where he would tell me that if he wanted to, he did a lot of undercover throughout his career, and he would always tell me that if he wanted to get anywhere, he would do one of two things, and nobody would question it. He would shuffle, so he would just go like this, and look down, and people were like, didn't know what to make of it, so they would just leave you alone. Or he would just have a cane. And he decided to do a little bit of a mixture of both. He dressed up like what he thought would be the Lion Shake, and like wore these dark sunglasses, and like walked into the room. I was working security, so he may or may not have had help, I don't know. But he comes in there, and I see him, and he's got this these glasses on, and now nobody questioned how he was able to walk around or whatever. And then he starts shuffling, just like he had told me that I used to do. And so I actually got to see him do the thing that he had joked about, to the point that not only did it work, but that they literally helped him up on the stage. And then Nihad Awad's at a fundraiser, so he's got to be sitting there thinking, all right, this guy, they brought him up on the stage, and I'm about to get a big check. And he walks up to Nihad Awad, and he says, Nihad Awad, you've been served. And while that's going on, there were two women that worked with us that were courageous patriots throughout the summer, and they were laying copies of the summons on all the donor tables, so they were able to look at them the whole time while they were at their fundraiser. So, good times.
John, you got a question?
Yes. Your earlier remarks about the media, and in context of everything else you said, I couldn't agree with you more. But my question is we fight, as you suggest, at the local level and take it up, until we get correct information that isn't fake news from operations like CNN, NBC, you all know you know the laundry list. And now with the, I'm concerned about Judge Janine also. There's got to be something more behind it. But in your opinion, how do we fix that?
Yeah.
How do we get CNN to get religion, if you will? Now, the other thing that I have a question about.
Okay, let me answer that, because I'll forget. And then,
One more thing, and I'm going to shut up.
Okay.
We have, within the conservative group, enough money that we could buy all of them out and give them change. I do not understand why President Trump consistently takes it on the chin from CNN when he could turn around and have somebody buy them and change things.
Okay.
I'm done.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Thank you. All right. Let me start on the CNN piece, because it actually goes to your second point. The analogy that I would make is, do we think that we could get state-run media in China to start putting out pro-American content? Do we think we could get state-run media in North Korea to start putting out pro-American content? CNN is state propaganda for the DNC. So we just have to stop expecting that we're ever going to change that organization. What we need to do, to your second point, is have enough conservatives out there that actually care enough to start our own media organizations, our own social media organizations. And we have to have two parallel lanes there. Now, we already have, by the way, some really good ones out there. One American News is a good one. Breitbart is good, really good. Raheem Kassam just started a new organization, I can't think of it, but he was with Breitbart London. Worldview Weekend with Brandon House, by the way, phenomenal, and he's in Memphis. You probably haven't, maybe you haven't heard of him, and that's part of the problem. Now, where the left knows, they know people like us don't need CNN and MSNBC to get our news. We're going to go out there and we're going to find it. Where they get people is the casual observer that doesn't really pay much attention, and they're in the airport and CNN's running 24/7, right? And they just look up, and every time they look up, it's something negative about President Trump. So the countering of that is we bypass it. And President Trump has bypassed it. He hasn't concerned himself with it. And I guess that's the point that we have to do, is that's noise. Don't let the noise distract us. And at the local level, face-to-face conversations are 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more effective than a like on Facebook or a retweet on Twitter, or something with CNN. In other words, if we can convince somebody of our position locally, face-to-face, then we can counteract what they're seeing on CNN. I didn't say it would be easy. And your point about conservatives not spending money and doing all these things, why is it that every single newspaper in America virtually is socialist, progressive, Marxist, whatever they're calling themselves today? Why aren't we having conservatives that care enough to put the money out there, even if, by the way, they wouldn't lose money if they did it right, because there's people that are thirsting for actual news instead of propaganda. But to your point, why are they not opening up? I don't know. But it has to change. And it can change. county by county. So what I encourage people to do, by the way, I have a workshop that I'm willing to do, and literally I'll just come out here, I'm not that far away, and do it on a Saturday for 4 hours, is talk about, okay, how do you go up against local media that isn't being truthful? Well, why isn't there more local newspapers that are doing this? There's more than a demand for it. There really isn't. And it's not going to be somebody like me that does that for your community. It'll be you that does it. So I would encourage you to create parallel media locally. Worry about the local stuff before we move on to the state and the federal level. And I took too long to answer that, but I hope that at least somewhat
It
addresses
answered the question, but it didn't satisfy me.
Fair enough. Again, it won't be easy. None of this will be easy, but you really bring up a really important point, is that the other side is spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on these issues.
How are you safe?
How am I safe? Yeah. By the grace of God. I mean, look, the one defeat mechanism for both of these groups, by the way, the Marxist movement and the jihadi movement, is that they move too far too quickly. They already think they've got it in the bag, so why would they want to bring attention to themselves by doing something to me? I mean, I really think that's the only thing keeping me safe right now, is because they're already winning. You know, so. Yeah.
Charles, my question is, how'd you get by with all this? To get all these documents, and then I'm sure Karen was very upset with you, and then publish a book about it. How did you get by with all this?
Well, I didn't really get by with it. There's been a lawsuit that's been going on for 10 years. We did everything perfectly legally. We had a legal team. You know, my father had worked these type of undercover operations his whole life, but this was private. This was not part of the military or the U.S. government. This was private, so we're in a private lawsuit. How I got them out of there was following the law, and they messed up. They are so arrogant that they don't think anybody would do anything like what I did. And look, you see it. People are terrified of this issue, right? I mean, it's the one subject that you do not talk about. And they know that, and they've kept the heat up. I mean, Judge Janine is a perfect example. She made a very factual statement, and yet she was pulled off the air, and it's happening all over the country. And the difference between Judge Janine is that's happening all over the country, but we're going to hear about her. We're not going to hear about the nurse that works at a hospital that sees refugees that are coming over and getting better treatment, or that they're defrauding the hospitals, and if they say something they get fired, right? We're not seeing that because they don't have a platform with Fox News. And that's one of my biggest complaints against many of the leaders in the conservative movement, is that they're not leading by example, because they already have a huge platform. And many of them, not all of them, but many of them aren't speaking boldly enough. They're sort of just taking this as it's a joke, like, oh, can you believe what this leftist said, and we all have a good laugh about it, but this is pretty serious right now. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question back
Yeah,
there.
can you compare, or maybe contrast Representatives Omar and Salsor?
Yeah, so they're really, Linda Sarsour has much more power than Ilhan Omar right now. She's actually got a lot of pull within the left. She's a leader of the Women's March. Now think about the irony of that. There's somebody that, per her own words, Linda Sarsour I'm talking about, says that her mentor is Siraj Wahaj. Does anybody know who he is? By the way, he was at that fundraiser that I was at, just so you know. Siraj Wahaj was the character witness for the blind sheikh in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And that's Linda Sarsour's mentor. And he's obviously an advocate of Sharia, but more importantly, if that's her mentor, when she said she hopes that Muslims wage jihad against President Trump, did anybody see this, where she said that at a Muslim Brotherhood conference? She knew what jihad was, and it wasn't that fuzzy war minute struggle, it was warfare. Linda Sarsour is much more powerful than Ilhan Omar, I would say. But they both have the same agenda, which is to destroy us from within. That women's march is being incredibly effective. And notice it has nothing to do with women's rights. It's just about a progressive socialist Marxist movement. Now, I don't mean, and this is the sinister nature of those things like the Women's March. Many of the people marching in there have absolutely no idea. They're college kids, and they're just like, well, of course I'm for women. And that's the sinister diabolical nature of Marxism, is that they take young minds that really want to do the right thing, and they don't hear our side of the debate on their universities, which, by the way, any conservative, we should really not give a nickel to these universities until they get their act together. Not a nickel.
Okay, we're going to have a couple more questions. We're going to have to cut it off. So,
Sir, I really appreciate this. I didn't even know what I was coming to, actually. I just had it on my calendar. But I've been writing articles for the local paper, and I've been covering the little knowledge that I have, because my editor bought a Democrat paper in our local county, and he called and asked me would I write a conservative article. So I've been writing all kinds of conservative articles, especially going into the Muslim and things that you've been talking about. I wanted to ask if it would be possible, I see somebody taking a film of this, if we could all buy one and get a cassette of it and have groups, you know, it's just trying to get a GOP together locally is kind of difficult to do, because like you described how some of them are. When I was chairman of the Republican Party and I first became chairman, I thought they were all conservative. I was so dumb, and I was blinded. So we have to get the information out, and I want to buy one for my editor, and I want us to be able to maybe get a video so we can have local groups, please.
Okay.
yeah, this video will be on the internet. We'll put it in our website, and also it'll be attached to the minutes of the meeting. So if you go on to our website, CrossCountyPatriots.com, you will be able to see that video in entirety. And also all the other meetings that we have are on there also. And we'll let Barry
Hey Wayne,
ask questions.
hey Wayne, I told him that I would not publish this video. I mean, I'm just doing it because we video all of our speakers, but it's going to be.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it then.
I can send it to him and he can give it to anybody he wants to. But
I mean, we just have to, one of the things we have to remember with the media now, you know, Sean Hannity just did an interview with CNN, 60 Minutes, and I don't know why. You know, really, and he even said that. I mean, he didn't know why he did it. And we've got to, like you said, I love your comment, where we have this idea because we're decent human beings, we're decent people, that we just want to believe that other people are. Sean Hannity goes on CNN, does a 60, you know, they interview him for an hour, they use 1 minute of it and they make him look. So when we do things like, look, I have no problem them seeing whatever, I don't care. But understand, whenever you, I'll give you an example. I was in North Carolina, and I was speaking to a GOP group, and they invited the local media, which I'm always like, fine, I don't care, come on out, but you know they're going to attack you and destroy you, so why are you subjecting yourself to the same, and then wonder, well, why did they do that? Because they want to destroy you. But it was interesting, there were two people from two different local papers at this meeting. One person actually stayed for my entire presentation. And I actually went through Islamic law. Every presentation is different. I didn't do that tonight. But I actually went through Islamic law. And they actually wrote a fair article because they listened to me. The other one, before I even started speaking, left the room, went and called CARE and got quotes from CARE about me. And what do you think CARE is going to say? So do you know what the headline was? Homegrown hate. That was the headline. One person had an actual article about what I really said. The guy that left 5 minutes before I started talking wrote an article called Homegrown Hate. Now my family has to see that, right? This is what they do. So I guess my thing is with local media, I'm not real too keen on on go ahead and pretending like they're going to actually be fair. I could be wrong, and I hope that you're conservative, and I'm sure you would be fair. But we got to stop being naive with these guys. They're ready to destroy us at every turn. So I just want to be smart about it.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
We're dealing with people that lie, cheat, and steal.
That's right.
How the heck how can you fight back against that without lying and cheating and stealing?
Well, look, at the end of the day, we fight back and we don't compromise our principles, and they do have the advantage. I will use the analogy of President Trump. He should not have won the election, and yet he did by the grace of God. So we shouldn't win because the states are against us, and yet we did. And so I would contend that from a national security perspective, if we actually get on our knees and pray every single day, and then go out and bust our tail for the country, we can win. We don't have to compromise. The second the enemy wants us to do that, the second we compromise our principles to win, we've already lost.
Okay, got one more question right here.
I only want to state that we have heard Bill Warner over and over, and we have heard Brigitte Gabriel. I assume that you contact them also?
Yeah, and Bill, and by the way, Dr. Warner would say this too, because he has spent years and years and years educating people on this threat. Now, there's only 2 non-Muslim Islamic scholars that I pay any attention to. Not that there aren't some good ones out there, I'm just saying I only have so much time in the day. And it's Dr. Warner and it's Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch. They know what they're talking about. But even Dr. Warner would say, we're past the stage of education, where we just sit around and learn about the threat. The stage that we're at now is we get out in the local community and we get active. What's going on in the schools, what's going on in the church. Do you know what they're teaching our children at the libraries? What's going on with our local politicians, our local media, our local GOP. Roll our sleeves up and get active, and we can't just be sitting at home reading a book and learning and learning and learning. I mean, we do need to keep reading and studying, but it needs to be more geared towards activism and less towards education.
I just want to make a statement. I'm allowed now.
No, we won't hear you in the back.
I just want to make a statement. And I started not to do this because, and I said, yeah, I need to do this. I voted for Bill Lee. At the last minute, I voted for Bill Lee. I'm not sure if anybody else in the room is as concerned as I am about some of the decisions that are coming out of that office right now. And I know he's a good man, but something's going wrong. I just want you to know next Wednesday is Muslim on the Hill Day. Muslim on the Hill. Our entire legislature will be subjected to hundreds of Muslims coming in to persuade them to vote on bills they want them voted the way they want it voted in, and that kind of thing. Now, I'm pretty darn old, but I don't think I have yet seen a Christian day on the Hill. And like Chris has said more than once, we got to blame ourselves some too, because our knees are not worn out. And the only thing that's really going to fix this is to wear our knees out, because only God is going to work through this and save our country for us.
Amen. Thank you. I just want to thank you for that, your comment. I just want to say quickly, thank you all for coming out tonight. When I first started to speak about this, about my experience, before the Islamic State came to power, not that many people wanted to talk about this because they didn't think it was a big deal. Now we can all see with Ilhan Omar and Linda Sarsour and everything that's going on that this is a big deal, and the Islamic State obviously. I just want to remind everybody that you take jihad out of the picture we still have real problems. This country could fall because of the left. It has nothing to do with jihad. This country was already rotting from within because of the Marxist movement. Now you add those two, and that's why it gets so serious. I have committed to travel around. I'm trying to stay within Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida. So this is Tennessee, so that's good. But I just got back from Minnesota, and yeah, I can't talk about that.
You like the South weather.
Yeah, but the point is I'm committed to speaking to as many groups between now and November 2020. So if anybody in here works with any GOP groups, Republican Women's Club, Young Republican groups, I'm more focused on our side and helping us get organized. If you want me to come back and do like a 2 or 3 or 4 hour program on a weekend where we talk, okay, let's actually talk about the issues right here in this community and how we can affect it, I'm more than willing to come out here and do that. Just ask me to come. But feel free to share. I've got my cards. Feel free to share my information with people that that you think I might want to come, and I will just come if it's within driving distance, 12 hours. I will just come and speak to that group. They just need to reach out to me. So I will be signing books. Thank you so much for coming out here. Please pray for me.
Okay, I want to really thank you for the talk we had. And if you really want to learn about what went on in CARE, read the book. It's just amazing. It's unbelievable. So I thank you again for coming. And I've got a few more things to cover, and then we'll close the meeting. Okay. We have Act for America meeting will be March the 28th at Rosarita's Cantina. And if you'd like to learn more about Islam, you need to go to that meeting too. Our next meeting will be March the 19th, and it'll be April the 19th. And Jackie Archer will be talking about textbooks and a lot about what's going on in our legislature. So I want to thank you for coming. If you have any questions, especially your new folks that are here for the first time, we'll be hanging around and glad to talk to you about it. Again, thank you so much for being generous for Chris, helping him get here and being able to do his good work. Thank you.